Okay, so you want to own a pet hotel, not a kennel. A hotel, cameras streaming live to owners' phones, a splash pool, plush bedding, maybe a pawcation package with a bedtime story. Pet owners now spend more on their animals than at almost any point in history. The pet care market is worth over $1.7 billion in boarding and daycare alone, and it's growing nearly 9% a year. It looks like one of the most emotionally bulletproof businesses in this entire series, built on a kind of love that doesn't shop around on price. Here's the problem. One of the most recognizable names in modern pet care, a company once valued at $650 million, filed for bankruptcy in the summer of 2025. So what actually happened? Here's the idea that explains almost everything else in this video. A pet hotel isn't really selling a place for your dog to stay. It's selling peace of mind to an owner who's about to leave the most important member of their household with a stranger, and that single anxious moment at drop-off is worth more to the business than the kennel itself. There are a few real versions here. A home-based or small DIY boarding operation is the cheapest way in, sometimes under $20,000 to start. A standard commercial daycare and boarding facility, the format most people picture, typically needs $45,000 to $120,000, climbing past $150,000 in an upscale urban market. A franchise, buying into an established brand with a proven layout, runs $532,000 to $1.1 million for a 5,000 to 10,000 square foot facility. And a true luxury pet hotel, with monitored suites, soundproofing, and premium overnight pricing, can require capital well into the millions once environmental monitoring systems and a large cash reserve are included. This video is about the standard commercial daycare and boarding format, still the backbone of the industry. For a standard facility, the biggest line items are build-out and safety infrastructure rather than anything glamorous. Flooring that can handle constant cleaning and prevent injury, fencing and containment systems, ventilation strong enough to manage odor and airborne illness, and enough indoor and outdoor play space to separate dogs by size and temperament all add up quickly. Add licensing, insurance, and initial staffing, and a standard build lands in that $45,000 to $120,000 range before a single dog checks in. Franchise operators pay more upfront, that $532,000 to $1.1 million range, but inherit a tested layout, staff training systems, and brand recognition that can shorten the time it takes to build local trust, which matters enormously in a business built on convincing strangers to hand over their pet. Daycare pricing typically runs $25 to $40 a day, and most facilities need 60 to 70% weekday occupancy just to break even. Overnight boarding runs higher, $40 to $80 a night at a standard facility, climbing to $180 to $350 a night at the luxury end. Gross margins across the industry sit around 40 to 60%, a healthy-looking number. But net margins tell a very different story, typically landing at just 10 to 20% once payroll, rent, insurance, and marketing are all subtracted. The gap between those two numbers is almost entirely labor, because unlike a gym or a coffee shop, a pet hotel's core service requires a real person watching, walking, and physically caring for every animal on site, in ratios set as much by liability and safety as by convenience. Here's a cost that almost never makes it into a first-time owner's spreadsheet: no-shows. Industry data suggests manual booking and reminder systems can lose a facility 10 to 25% of potential revenue simply to appointments that never show up, a slot that was reserved, staffed for, and then never filled. Add-on services like grooming look like easy extra margin, but a professional groomer working inside a daycare facility typically takes a 70% commission on every dollar of grooming revenue, meaning what looks like a second business line on the menu board is, financially, closer to a modest referral fee. None of this shows up when you're touring an empty facility deciding whether to open one. It only shows up once you're actually running it. The deeper you go into this industry, the more it starts to look less like hospitality and more like risk management with a mascot. Soundproofing and environmental monitoring systems exist because barking, temperature, and air quality failures are the fastest way to lose a facility's reputation or its license in a single bad incident. A veterinary consulting retainer and, at the higher end, an emergency transport vehicle exist because something will eventually go wrong with an animal on site, and how fast a facility responds is the difference between a manageable incident and a lawsuit. One-to-one staffing ratios for outdoor time aren't a luxury add-on, they're often close to a liability necessity. This is the part of the business that never appears in the glossy photos of dogs playing in a splash pool, and it's also the part that determines determines whether the business survives its first serious incident. The core formula here is simple. Daily revenue equals dogs times average price times utilization rate. A 40-dog facility running at 60% capacity can actually generate less revenue than a 25-dog facility running at 90% because the second facility is converting nearly all of its available capacity into paying customers, while the first is carrying empty kennels and idle staff hours every single day. At a mature, well-run commercial location, annual revenue in the $900,000 to $1.5 million range with a 25 to 40% EBITDA margin is realistic, translating to somewhere between $125,000 and $600,000 in annual profit. But that range is wide for a reason. Utilization discipline, not facility size, is what actually separates the top and bottom of it. Look at what happened to WAG. Founded in 2015 to connect pet owners with on-demand dog walkers and sitters through an app, WAG rode the same wave of pandemic-era pet adoption, boosting this entire industry, and went public in 2022 through a SPAC merger at a $650 million valuation, once backed by SoftBank. It expanded into pet insurance, veterinary e-prescribing tools, and wellness products, chasing the same trust and affection this entire industry runs on. But the core gig economy model never turned reliably profitable. The company reported net losses of $38.6 million in 2022, $13.3 million in 2023, and $17.6 million in 2024, while 2024 revenue actually fell 16% to $70.5 million. Its stock traded below $1 for most of 2024 and 2025, triggering repeated NASDAQ delisting warnings. On July 21, 2025, WAG filed a prepackaged Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Delaware, handing full ownership of the reorganized company to its secured lender and wiping out existing shareholders. It emerged just 66 days later as a private company, delisted from NASDAQ entirely. WAG's app-based model isn't identical to a physical pet hotel, but the underlying lesson transfers directly. High customer acquisition costs, thin per-transaction margins, and a business model that depended on endless growth to eventually reach profitability collapsed the moment growth slowed down, regardless of how much genuine demand for pet care still existed in the market. The love people have for their pets never wavered. The financial structure built on top of that love did. In the good year, utilization holds in the 75 to 85% range. No-show losses stay controlled through a disciplined booking and deposit system. Add-on services like grooming and training run at a steady clip, and no safety incident ever reaches a lawsuit. A mature facility generating $1.2 million in revenue at a 30% margin puts about $360,000 toward the owner's bottom line for the year. In the realistic year, nothing dramatic happens at first. A new competitor opens across town, and utilization slips from 80% towards 65%. No-show revenue leakage creeps back up toward 20% because reminder calls stopped being a daily habit once the business felt established. A minor incident with one dog and another triggers a costly insurance claim and a wave of cautious cancellations that takes months to fully recover from. None of it makes headlines, but margin compresses from 30% towards something closer to 15% on that same $1.2 million in revenue, and the owner's take-home falls to around $180,000 for the year, a gap of $180,000 from the exact same building, with the exact same kennels, serving a town full of people who love their pets exactly as much as they did the year before. That's the business. The pet was never really the product. The trust an owner hands over at the door is, and that trust is worth exactly as much as the systems built to protect it.